Again, welcome to the All Saints Forum, whether you're here at 132 North Euclid or online somewhere. Grateful that you're here today. We are a faithful remnant this morning here. I look around and realize part of the reason I'm up front is Grandma's doing the forum so all the kids could go to the Pride Parade. So we want to pray up all of those who are gathering as we speak or heading there to Hollywood Boulevard for LA Pride, where our Bishop John Taylor will be riding with a contingent that's about over 100 friends and siblings from around the Diocese of LA, so we want to bless them in their work this morning. I am Susan Russell. My pronouns are she, her. I'm one of the priests on staff here at All Saints Church, and it's my privilege to convene this conversation about moving beyond inclusion to celebration for the LGBTQ community. This is one of our Centennial Forums. We're in the middle of a 100-year celebration, not of the existence of All Saints Church as a congregation, but of our current incarnation with this church building, which was dedicated in 1924. So throughout this year, we've taken opportunities to mark moments and to talk about our theme, which is engaging our past in order to imagine our future. We want to be a people deeply grounded in our tradition, but always growing forward into God's future, which, as we know, is always growing and changing, sometimes in ways that are wonderful and amazing, and often in ways that are challenging, scary, and opportunities for growth. That's what we call them. So we're going to be able to dive into our archives and hear some words of wisdom from our Rector Emeritus, George Regas, and also have two amazing siblings who've agreed to come and give us some of their wisdom from the past. We're saying siblings now instead of brothers and sisters because it's non-binary inclusive, okay? I got a giggle from the boys over there. They're going to help us. Jim White and Rick Thyne are going to talk to us about their role back in the day as we were working to become more fully, move beyond inclusion here at All Saints Church. But to begin, let's begin with a moment of prayer, if we may. God dwells in you. Creator God, Holy One, maker of love and source of joy, we give you thanks for the infinite variety of your creation. We bless you that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that we are your beloved rainbow tribe. Grant us the courage to tell our truth, to honor ourselves, to love our neighbors, and to share your grace with the world aching for healing. We pray because of Jesus, who shows us the way. Amen. And now a very brief setup of this interview. It was an interview we did with George Regas while he was still in this realm about the process that he went through to be able to break through that stained glass ceiling of the first blessings that happened here in Pasadena in 1992. So without further ado, I'm going to attempt to make this work. I'm the content person, not the tech person, so hopefully this works.
Doing justice is in the DNA of All Saints Church. It was in the protest by All Saints Rector Frank Scott against the deportation of Japanese Americans to Manzanar in 1942. It was in the determination of John Burt to stand with Martin Luther King Jr. in spite of the death threats phoned to the All Saints Rectory in 1964. And it was in the voice of George Regas when he preached these words from the All Saints pulpit on November 11th, 1990.
I know many same-sex couples in this congregation. Some of them I know up close and down deep. I'm convinced without any question of the integrity and goodness of their relationship. I believe I should bless those unions if the request is made. Even though the National Episcopal Church says no to the blessing of same-sex covenants, I feel God is calling me and calling this great parish into a new place. I've come to believe that not to be willing to bless a relationship that is committed to the same standards of love and lasting fidelity as heterosexuals is to say, in effect, to a same-sex couple that whatever their relationship is, it is not fit for public Christian affirmation, support, and celebration. We should not be in such a place in this Christian community. The blessing of a same-sex covenant is the clearest symbol the church can offer that these precious children of God are fully accepted into the life of the congregation. Don't ever underestimate the power of healing such an act would bring. When we bless a union of a gay or lesbian couple, I believe this is what we are saying. The church sees goodness in you, goodness in your love for each other. We recognize your intention to share that love for a lifetime. The church wants to bless you on your journey and sustain you when the way is difficult. We cheer you on your way and hope for your success, and we shall rejoice in your victories and weep for your failures. After a long pilgrimage, I'm solidly committed to bless same-sex covenants at this altar. But I want to listen to you and make our way together as a parish. I look forward to that day when gay men and lesbians will be embraced fully and unconditionally in love with justice. And once more in this church, in this place, at this altar, those famous words of the prophet Amos will mark our corporate life. Let justice flow on like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amen.
The decision to preach God, sex, and justice that November morning didn't just happen overnight.
Little by little, the word spread that All Saints welcomed the gay community. And more and more gay and lesbian people began to be part of that community. And they came to me in about 1980, and we want to start a gay and lesbian group. Well, I don't know about that. I didn't know how that would go over. And then, but we talked about it, and so I said, fine, let's do it. And then they wanted to have it announced in the bulletin. I said, golly, why can't we just do it on the side? And so galas were formed, G-A-L-A-S, Gay, Lesbian, All Saints. And so they would invite me about a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a year to come. And it was my first experience, really, of going significantly into a gay or lesbian person's life, to really hear them and be open to them. And so we did that for a few years. And then every time I would go, they would say, we want you, a couple of them there, we want you to bless our unions. And I said, well, I can't do that. Every time I would go, they would push me, battle me, argue with me. But I still questioned how to put it into practice and still keep my job. And so that's when, about 1988, 87, Mark Benson and Phil Straw came to see me. They taught Sunday school. Mark sang in the choir. And they came to see me and they said, will you bless our union? I said, well, I'm all for you. I really know you. I love you. I know your love has integrity. But so let's have a blessing here in my office. They said, no, we don't want that. We want a blessing just like a straight couple in the church with all our friends where you bless us there. I said, well, I just don't think I'm ready for that. They said, well, we'll wait till you're ready.
Tim Safford, who's now rector of Christ Church in Philadelphia, was on the All Saints staff at that time and has his own memories of that wait. It was truly Mark and Phil who were the catalysts for the sermon. That is to say, first came Mark and Phil, and through them came George's conversion on blessings as public liturgies, because of their insistence that the ceremony be public, not private or hidden. Not that others weren't pushing him also, but Mark and Phil, from my vantage point, were key. They were the prophets to George, and through him to the larger church. I think it's similar to Jesus' encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. Jesus was only willing to break the barriers present so far, suggesting that to go further as to include her would be like throwing the children's food to the dogs. She looked him in the eye and told him, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table. In a similar way, Mark and Phil were that woman to George. Tina Clark was one of those others Tim refers to.
We were at the newcomers, forum or whatever you have that they, back then, that they would invite you to. And we were in this big room, and this was all the people that were coming that were wanting to join All Saints. And we were doing a Q&A with our rector, which was George Regas. And so people were asking all the questions and the normal questions that you would ask about joining a new community and church. And all of a sudden, I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I raised my hand and I said to George, so what is your feeling on same-sex couples? And the room just got silent. And George just looked at me, and I know now that he's like my dad now, but looking back at it now, I think he was probably saying, oh my God, where did you come from and how soon can you leave? But there was just this pregnant pause, and everybody was looking at George. They were looking at me, and George walked back to me and he says, I'm working on that. and that was it. I think I became, in the beginning, with George, maybe a thorn in his flesh, because I would say, have you figured out in your head yet how you feel about this? Do you know, what are you working on? What has to happen? And there was another couple here too, a male couple at the time, that was really pushing for the answers. And I think that's what I was doing, is pushing for the answers. And not letting there be a distraction. It was a process, and it had nothing to do with, this was a long time ago. This had nothing to do, anybody that knows George's heart in the heart of this church, it's like, okay, I preach grace and I preach love and I preach, we all come to the table. So let me see how I get there fully and authentically. Am I happy that 20 years ago, 20-something years ago, more than 20 years ago, that I asked George that question? I don't think in my wildest dreams ever thought it could be what it is today.
So that was the inimitable George Regas telling his own story. And one of the things I love about it is it really paints the picture. This is not someone who just woke up one morning and turned over and said, hey, Mary Regas, I think I'm going to bless some gay people. This is someone who thought about it, struggled with it, listened to the community talked, there was dialogue, it took time, it was hard. And nevertheless, we persisted, and we are where we are today. For me, this is an icon, an exemplar of the essence of All Saints Church. I don't know all the backstories for all those other inclusion moments, but I suspect they were the same. And I know we have moments right now and moments in front of us when we need to continue to do that hard work together. But what we saw here was how we've done it in the past, and I hope that that can inspire us as we engage that past to imagine how we can do that in the future. Now we're going to hear from Rick Thyne, I'm going to let him tell his own story, but let's just give it up for Rick.
For an old straight man to get that musical introduction is quite something, I must tell you. What does not show up in that series with George is the environment in which we were thinking and trying and studying this issue. It was in the middle of the AIDS crisis. And in a tragic irony, the couple who were our first to bless, the first couple George blessed, Mark and Phil, by the time we got through the 10-year process of granting that blessing, Phil was one of AIDS victims. I once asked Ann Peterson, who was George's executive assistant, during that time, what in the worst of those years was going on here? How often were we burying a gay person who died from AIDS? And Ann quickly responded, in the worst years, about once every 2 weeks. In that environment, George Regas preached that sermon. In that environment, he decided to bless people who had become cursed in the culture. So after he preached the sermon in typical George fashion, he formed a study group. I was a part of that with 8 other people. And he gave us the assignment of coming up with a paper that would define why we were going to do this at All Saints Church. So we gathered under the leadership of Lou Fleming, a member of the vestry, and a wonderful man whom we miss. And we went looking at first for models for what George had asked us to do, other churches, other denominations, other organizations, anywhere in the country who were blessing same-sex unions, and found a total of 0. So we made it up. We just made it up. A group working on the Bible on that subject, on psychology on that subject, on talking to families with gay people, on talking to people who had trouble with gay people, having forums throughout that year, gathering the kind of information that would allow us, after a year, to present to the vestry, who then presented to the congregation our commitment to bless same-sex unions. I want to say 3 things I learned in that process. First, if you're going to do something, take on a big subject. Take on something really significant and give your soul to it. I can tell you that Lou Fleming did that and inspired the rest of us to go all into the deep end of the pool. Second, I've mentioned it twice, get great leadership. We had George's leadership and encouragement, although there were times when we'd present some of our report back and he would do what he did in the movie. Oh my God. You realize from the time Mark and Phil started with George until George preached that sermon was a decade. That's how hard that work was. But under George and Lou's leadership, we got it done. And third, in addition to taking on something big and finding the right leaders, just work your butt off. There's no soft or easy way to accomplish great things. Just one final story out of that experience. We had a vestry retreat in the middle of all of that, and we did it in Oxnard on the water. We stayed in a hotel. Peter Gadd, a vestry member and also a member of the task force, was responsible for arrangements for that weekend. Peter just was his own witty self, so he decided that the dinner on Saturday night would not be at our usual restaurant or something. The vestry had dinner on the waterfront at a place called Surf and Tacos. We showed up at this shop that had over here a taco stand. And people were trying on wetsuits and snorkels and pretending to be surfers. And Beach Boy music was playing in the background. And we're in the middle of all of this, just trying to have fun. And one of the great gifts I have from that experience is a photo of me dancing to slow music with Jim White. Here we are, an old straight man and a not quite so old gay man, still dancing our way into God's future.
Well, next up is the not-so-old gay man, Jim White, who is going to share with us his experience of being part of the Moving Beyond Inclusion movement that followed George's sermon.
Thank you for that memory, Rick. Not an easy act to follow. Susan gave me a 5-minute limit, and I have about a 30-minute story to tell. So I'm going to read mostly what I'm doing here. Remember, Ed Bacon, our former rector, for those of you who have only known Mike, arrives in 1995, shortly after, or not too long after all of this. The vestry had created an inclusion task force to sort of oversee all things LGBT, since we had been blessing same-sex unions since 1991, and that was a fairly controversial stand at that time. And of course, somehow I wound up as the chair of that task force. Sorry, I'm a little bit sniffly. Watching that video of George broke me up. Switched to the Diocese of Newark, New Jersey. Walter Ryder had been Bishop Diocesan of Iowa, but had retired, and in the 90s was working as bishop assisting for Bishop John Spong in the Diocese of Newark. In 1990, he had ordained a gay man living in a sexual relationship with another man. So in 1995, with their hair on fire over what was going on in the church, 10 conservative bishops charged Walter in January 1995 with holding and teaching doctrine contrary to that held by this church. under the so-called heresy canon, and thereby violating his ordination vows. In Episco speak, this is called a presentment, and the bishop is tried by a court of bishops. So poor Walter, a retired bishop with no office, no secretary, no money for lawyers, was kind of in a spin, so All Saints, among others, swung into action and held several fundraisers and did what we could to support him in that battle. When the time came, Ed Bacon, D. Paul Thomas, an actor and writer who had ideas about creating a play about all of this, and I went to Wilmington, Delaware, where the trial was held in the cathedral there. I've got stories about that trip, but no time here to tell them. But suffice to say that my first time traveling with Ed was an eye-opener. Anyway, long story short, eventually in a 7-1 majority decision, the bishops sitting on the court for the trial of a bishop ruled that there is, quote, no doctrine prohibiting the ordination of a non-celibate homosexual person living in a faithful and committed sexual relationship with a person of the same sex, end quote. So Walter was off the hook and all was well. But all of this had gotten our juices flowing, and with General Convention coming up in the summer of '97, we decided we needed to do some organizing, national organizing, and start pushing the church on normalizing the ordination of LGBT people. And while we're at it, let's work on getting the church to bless same-sex relationships. Remember, this is 15 years before the legalization of marriage equality, and none of us ever dreamed that would ever become a reality in our lifetimes. So blessing relationships was the best we could hope for. And we had already done our first one here in 1991 with what I would say a somewhat hesitant approval of our bishop, Fred Borsch. And there was quite a bit of that going on in different places around the church as well as here. In talking about all of this, I'd been talking about how I had never been thrilled with the word inclusion because to me, it implies that one group of people with power and control deem to include another group of individuals without those privileges. And I said that when I tell people about All Saints, I say that it's a place that has moved beyond inclusion and is really about helping people celebrate who they are and what God has made them. In our planning for what we were going to do to make this happen, Ed and Tim Safford, an associate here at the time, you saw earlier, and some others had a conference call with Gene Robinson, who was then the canon to the ordinary in New Hampshire, the bishop's chief of staff, in effect. This was 6 years before he was elected bishop. And I don't remember what triggered it, but Ed said something about calling the conference something to do with inclusion, and Gene said, I was really hoping we could move beyond inclusion with this. And we all sort of set up and said, I think I hear the Holy Spirit talking, let's call it Beyond Inclusion. So we had our name and we were off and going. So we decided we would hold a national conference here and invite theologians and church politicians and whoever wanted to come, and we'd get things moving in that direction. So in the spring of '97, with General Convention coming in July of that year, we held that conference, and around 250 people showed up from all over the country to hear theologians like Marilyn McCord Adams and Juan Oliver and others hold forth on why the canons needed to change to accomplish all of this. It was very successful. So we went to General Convention in Philadelphia and had a booth in the exhibit hall and had lots of handouts about equality for LGBT people. And we actually had live living homosexuals that people could come and talk to. Members of the parish and people from other parishes around the country that were living in committed same-sex relationships, and they could actually experience these people. Excuse me. As part of our booth, we had rented a popcorn machine at the suggestion of Ann Peterson, telling us that they had done the same thing in the 70s over the ordination of women. So we had this great theater-sized popcorn machine in the exhibit hall, and we're giving out free bags of popcorn. And of course, the smell wafted through the exhibit hall, and we were the most popular booth in the place. My favorite story is when some old coot came up and was eyeing our materials, and I think it was Terry Takeda, who asked him if he'd like a bag of popcorn, and he said, "I would never eat that popcorn, it's popped on the flames of hell." We didn't get what we wanted that year, but 3 years later in Denver, we got a major resolution passed that recognized that there are same-sex couples who live in lifelong committed relationship, and that set us on the road to equality. That's all I've got time for. Sorry. Thanks.
Thanks. Let's give it up for both Rick and Jim. It's hard to ask people to come into a space like this and tell these stories in 5 minutes, but that we only have 45, and we wanted to make sure we had an opportunity for as many voices as possible. How we got from there to here is another story. If we had world enough and time, we'd tell it today. We may do another forum. We may do another adult ed during the summer. And I want to also direct all of y'all to the All Saints website. If you scroll down, it's very easy to find. Scroll all the way down to the bottom, click on LGBTQ Welcome, and then there's a link to a resource page. You can find the video clip we just watched of George's there. There's other data and background information as well. And I'm also, as we're sitting here thinking, I'm thinking of other things we need to add, Keith, so you'll be getting an email probably on Tuesday to update some of that stuff. I just want to do a minute or two, and then I'm hoping we'll have time for questions. We have about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, we're going to ask someone, or maybe I'll just run around with the microphone and see what your questions are. For me, I came to All Saints as the executive director of something called Claiming the Blessing. It was the brainstorm of many of the folks we've been talking about when we have the Beyond Inclusion group from All Saints. We had Integrity, which was the National LGBTQ Caucus. We had Oasis Ministries. There were a variety of people eventually working around, and I'm talking like 2002, right after Denver, the Denver Convention. And if you've ever worked in justice movements, you know that sometimes just maybe a little bit of competition can arise. And you have groups that have the same goal but are working at cross purposes. That's how Claiming the Blessing came to be. Not because it was just wonderful vision of, oh, we should all come together because we're doing the same thing. It was, we need to get everybody at the table and figure out how we quit working at cross purposes, competing with each other, and, arguably fighting with each other. I mean, I remember back, George there was a point where they were referring to us as homosexual persons, and then we became gays and lesbians, and then we came GLBT, and then they switched it to LGBT, and half of the G's got really annoyed that the L was coming first. And so there was a whole bunch of infighting about that. And I'm just telling that quickly to say that none of it's easy. Behind the rainbow curtain, there was a lot of challenges, there was a lot of hurt, there was a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but nevertheless, here's where we are. You'll hear more about where we are in the sermon, which is shameless self-promotion because I'm preaching. But we're here to celebrate those incremental victories as we continue to move forward for all of the things that still need solving for the LGBTQ plus community in our nation, our church, and our world. On your way out, on the table, you'll find some resources Thomas Diaz has printed out for us from the LGBTQ community, a page of resources, but also that FAQ sheet about Jesus, the Bible, and LGBTQ people that you may or may not find helpful, but it's there. It's also available in Spanish on the website. So that's sort of my input. Again, look for future opportunities to continue this conversation, and pray for us when we go to General Convention a week after next. I can't believe it's coming up so fast. And now we have 10 minutes for questions or conversation. Does anyone have a question? I'm going to call out Phil and then Sue and then Chad, so we're making sure we're...
So my question is to tap on the wisdom of the three of you here a little bit. So all of you spoke about kind of the, I'll call it magic ingredients that were present, the leadership, kind of the environment around us and what was going on, and a bunch of other kind of magic that came together and made something really happen that was very important in the world. Is that a formula that you can conjure up, or is it we just got lucky to have all of that here? How much of this is, you think, reproducible at other the same issue or other similarly important issues?
Great question. I don't know if either of you want to jump in, but because I'm at the microphone, I'll start. I tell people all the time I was a history major because there was no math requirement, so I'm going to try and do math out loud. I'm going to say it was 10% luck, it was 20% grace, and the rest of it was organization, commitment, and the Holy Spirit sending us the right people at the right time. So yes, I think it is absolutely a replicable model. It is not unlike the model of, we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women. We referred to that earlier. It is not unlike that same model of people who came together and pushed in order to move the church forward on women's ordination. We used a lot of those same tools and some of the same people in terms of imagining, helping the church imagine itself to become what it says it is, I would say, is the essence for me. And we can look, and when I say church, I mean big church, not All Saints Church. The church itself is still growing into its own full stature of Christ. If we look at the church as the body of Christ in the world, we're not there yet, but we're further down the road than we were because of those who've broken down the barriers of exclusion, of oppression, and of an old patriarchal mindset that God said it, we believe it, that settles it. So that's my short answer. Anything to add?
I would talk about bringing those disparate groups together.
Yeah.
Working across.
Yeah. So Jim, because he's off mic, wants to highlight the importance of bringing those disparate groups together who had the same goal, but different tactics, different places on the continuum, the hard work of bringing them together and creating a coalition that could help make that happen. I'm not going to talk about egos now, because we'll be here all day. But Jim wanted to note egos. So let's get Sue Rodiger up here on the end.
Thank you. I apologize for not standing. It's a major production. First, I want to thank my siblings for doing this work. If it weren't for All Saints Church, this unrepentant lesbian would have nowhere to go to church. So thank you. My question is, when will we make the movie?
When will we make the movie? Well, I don't know if anyone out there is watching and has access to money, production, and a screenwriter. I'd be happy to serve as a consultant, but thank you for that. I do think there's a book in it. I've joked sometimes that when I retire, I'm going to write a book that they're not going to necessarily, I'm not going to make any money writing it, but I might make some money getting people paying me not to publish it. So that's it. All right, Chad had his hand up in the back there by Keith. Because you're getting your steps in. Oh. And then.
Hi, Jim. My name is Chad. I've been here for about 15 years, and most of those years have been a part of our writers group here on campus. And so I'm a lover of words. I'm a lover of the word inclusion, and I'm wondering if we have any great ideas for a new word to kind of embody this new idea, where where one group is not just, kind of allowing the osmosis of a smaller group or individual, but rather, it's one group that grows.
Yeah. So I'll take a quick stab at that, and I'll call out Clara Williams, who I saw nodding away, because we've been in rooms where we've been having these conversations. A few years ago, we did a bunch of focus groups and came up with our core values, and one of them is radical inclusion. Nobody is against radical inclusion. However, it does have that energy that Jim was just talking about, that somehow we want to be radically inclusive, but inclusion tends to infer that someone is including someone else, and that has its own challenges in terms of language. We have not come up with words yet. One of them was radical welcome. I think that's a little tepid myself, but we're trying things on. But I also think it's important in terms of knowing our history to understand that this is not the first time we've had the conversation in the congregation about wanting to be a place that's beyond inclusion to celebration. And that is wherever you find yourself on the journey, wherever you find yourself on the continuum, not just of gender identity or sexual orientation, but gender or culture or economics or race or any of the things that the world wants to divide us about. We want to be a beloved community where diversity is not something that is divisive, but something which calls us to our greater capacity to incarnate the love of God in the world. So that's my short answer. And then down here, I think we have time for one more. We're at 9:42.
Hello everyone, my name is Luis Eduardo. I am scared to death and I have no idea what I'm going to say, but I just want to try to connect these two things. This lady, Tina Clark, I believe she mentioned this phrase, pregnant pause, and my mother, who learned to accept his gay son, with a 5th grade education, when I asked her to mention, how she was able to accept me as a gay son, she wrote 2 words: concepts change. And I still, I have, intellectually, I have, but the amazing thing, and now that I know that Reverend George Rigo, may he rest in peace, struggled with this for 10 years. Thanks to him, and for 5 years, it took me 5 years of hearing his preaching and crying every single time that he preached. I learned to accept myself as a gay Latino man. So concept change, and the inclusive, the love of God doesn't know boundaries. Love doesn't exclude anyone, and I think that we can use this in any way where we can suspend whatever we have and just start questioning, and more importantly, allow the Spirit of God, which is love, to make impossible things. Thank you.
Amen. And as Lawrence would say, our brother gets the last word. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your faithfulness. And now we're adjourned for church. Thank you. God bless and take care.